Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's Writers Chat. We are delighted to see you here. If whether you're watching us live or whether you're watching the replay, we just thank you as writers for taking the time to develop yourself, learn something new, refresh a skill. This is Writers Chat. This is where we like to gather as writers, all things writing for writers and by writers. So it's just a wonderful community, and we're glad that you're all here and a part of it today. We've got a very specific skill today for all of us to learn and relearn and freshen up and get better at. And we have a special guest today. So I'm going to ask Brandy to introduce our guest and our topic today. So Brandy, take it away.
Hi, we are so delighted to welcome back with us Tracy Crump. Tracy Crump dispenses her hope in her award-winning book, Health, Healing, and Wholeness, Devotions of Hope in the Midst of Illness, based on her nursing and caregiving experiences. Her writing has appeared in diverse publications, including Women's World, Focus on the Family, Ideals, Upper Room, and Guidepost books. But she's best known for contributing 22 stories, 22 to Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's hard to get even one in there. Her course on writing for the series is one of Serious Writer's top sellers, and her popular newsletter includes story callouts. Tracy teaches writing workshops, proofreads for Farmers Almanac. I'm curious how you got that job, and edits for private clients. She recently started a blog for caregivers, our unsung heroes, and yes, they are. Tracy and her husband, Stan, live in North Mississippi and dote on 5 completely unspoiled grandchildren. And she can be found on the web at tracycrump.com. We'll put that in the chat for you. And Tracy is here to talk to us today about something that every writer really needs to know how to do, and that is writing query letters. Sometimes it feels like there's a little bit of mystique to that. She's going to go through and talk to us so that by the time we're done, we know more about what we're doing with query letters. So thank you so much, Tracy, for coming and sharing with us about this great topic.
Thank you, Brandy. It's so good to see everybody. Well, I have a PowerPoint for us, so I'm going to share my screen. Give me just a second here. Okay. And I need to bring up some notes. All right, we are going to talk about conquering query letters. As Brandy said, they are essential. If you're writing, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, articles or books, it's important to know how to write a query letter. And we need to think of it as a job interview. And that's really what it is. Now, a lot of people, a lot of authors are frightened by query letters, but you really don't have to be. Just because you're competing against thousands of other applicants, there's just really no reason to be afraid. In fact, the query letter can become your best friend. And we often will write queries even before we begin writing the article or the book. And that will keep you from possibly wasting your time writing an article or a book that maybe no one wants to read. I know it sounds terrible, but that's what I call the hit or miss method. And I used that when I first started writing. I would write an article and then I would start looking to see who might want to publish it. And that's kind of the backwards way to do it. So that's why we're going to learn about writing query letters, so we don't have to waste our time doing that. And we'll have a lot more success that way. So what exactly is a query letter? It is a sales pitch in which the writer sells his or her idea, expertise, and writing ability in a one-page letter. And I want to stress, one-page letter. It's important to keep it succinct. So you're going to send this query letter. You might send it to a magazine editor to sell an article idea, or send to a publisher offering your book proposal or your manuscript, or you might even send it to an agent seeking representation. So there are a lot of uses for query letters. Just like a job interview, first impressions count. And the query letter is the editor's first impression of you. So you kind of think of it as getting one means of getting your foot in the door. And you can do that if you'll just follow a few simple guidelines, a few simple rules. Now, we're going to focus today a little bit more on writing art or querying about articles or nonfiction, because that's more my area of expertise. But we'll talk a little bit about books and fiction. And all of it can be applied to any of these areas. Now, the first thing we're going to do before we even write our piece or write our query letter is we're going to do our homework. And the first part of our homework is to research the publication or the publication that you want to submit to. You want to first show that you understand their audience and their company. I remember years ago, this was many writers' market guides back, but I remember one time an editor in his, they'll put their guidelines, a little bit about their guidelines in the market guide. And one editor, this was so important to him, he said that they publish maybe one fiction book a year, yet 99% of the submissions they got were for fiction, which they didn't do. And he said of the remaining 1%, most were not even in the genre they were looking for. So it was evident to him that these authors were not investigating him. They did not know what he wanted. They did not know what his audience was. So, when you do that, you're really wasting his time and your time. So it's better to just take a little bit of time beforehand and do your research and see what it is that they want. Next, you also want to follow the guidelines. Study them carefully. I can't stress this enough. We talk about this when I do Chicken Soup for the Soul workshop, because so many people do not follow the guidelines. So if they ask for an article or they ask for articles from, say, 750 to 1,000 words, don't propose a 1,500 word article. They're not going to change their guidelines just for one writer. Be sure, and we're professionals, so we want to be sure to stay within their word counts. The same thing goes for books. See what word counts they're looking for and stay within those word counts. Another thing that you'll want to do is make sure that they want a query letter. Not all companies do. There are some magazine editors that they want to see the article right away. Now, most of them would prefer a query letter. But once again, that's part of your homework, part of your research is to make sure they even want a query letter. And if they do they want it by email or snail mail? Now, more than likely today, they're going to want it by email, but there are a few holdouts still that want you to mail it in. So if you do, if you remember that SASE from way back, that was a self-addressed stamped envelope, be sure that you send one of those. But if they want it by email, which most of them will, you need to check and see, do they want it as an attachment or do they want it copy and pasted into the body of the email? Most of them will want an attachment. But again, that's one thing you need to make sure before you submit. If you don't send it the way they want it, they're just going to chunk it. I know one magazine editor that if she got she wanted everything by email. If she got anything in the mail, she just threw it straight in the garbage. So you don't want that to happen to your work. You put time into this query letter, so you want it to be seen. Also, don't send any simultaneous submissions unless the guidelines state that that's what they accept. And if you're not familiar with that term, a simultaneous submission is where you're submitting to more than one editor, more than one publisher at a time. If they take that, that's fine. And it saves you time because you're querying several people at one time. But if they don't want a simultaneous submission, you can really make an editor mad if they have put time into looking at your work and deciding if they want to publish it and then find out that you've sold it elsewhere. So make sure that they will accept a simultaneous submission. So once again, if you follow the guidelines, you will be ahead already of many other writers because there's so many that will not follow the guidelines. So that is so important to read those and find out what they want. Then you can also read some of their previously published material. That gives you an idea of what kinds of things that they like, that they're looking for, and make sure that your writing is going to be a good fit for them. You can often find sample articles online, or you may even be able to find some at your local library. Doesn't mean you have to buy a copy of every magazine that you want to submit to, or every book. You can find books at the library and just look through them. See if your writing, it kind of coincides with what they want. Now you can still request sample articles or sample magazines, sometimes from from publishers. I was really glad I did that one time. I wanted to submit something to Ideals, and they've been around since I think 1944, but I had just never read any of them. So I asked for a sample copy. I had to pay for it, but I was so glad. I don't think I would have been published in there if I had not. They have a very unique way of publishing their articles. And so because I read that, then I was able to slant my article and write my article the way that they wanted. So I actually published 2 articles with them. That's how important it is to do this research ahead of time. It can make a difference between a sale or no sale. Finally, as part of your homework, you want to make sure you direct your query letter to the appropriate editor. Editors change companies frequently. So it's really good to find out for sure. You can look online and find their guidelines. And this probably applies more to large publishers, large magazines, because they'll have different editors over different departments. Or they may have, in a book publisher, may have editors that oversee different genres. So you want to make sure you're sending it to the right editor. Otherwise, once again, your query letter may never be seen. You may have to call the company to make sure that you have the right editor. I wouldn't ask to speak to the editor, but you can just call and say, now, is this the appropriate person to submit this to? Be sure if you do that while you have them on the phone, make sure you've got their name, the correct spelling of their name, and the correct address. A lot of times nowadays, it's hard to tell if they're a man or a woman. So if you find that out, then you can address them correctly as Mr., Mrs., Miss, whatever. And that's a good thing. And I can't tell you how many editors that complained that people either misspell their name or they call them a Mr. when they're a Miss. So it is important. Editors are people, and this makes a difference to them. Now, it's not the end of the world if you don't know the correct editor. It's better not to just address it to Dear Editor. Do your best to find out. But also, if that editor has left, I had an experience one time where I had already published an article with a particular magazine, and so I just emailed that editor again and to propose another article, and found out that she had left the company. But fortunately, the new editor was checking her email. That won't always happen. A lot of times they'll have a new email address and you won't know. So again, if you don't get a response within, usually you wait 4 to 6 weeks. And if you haven't gotten a response, you may want to contact the company and make sure that editor is still there. Make sure you've got the correct contact information. So that's your homework that you need to do before you ever write your query letter. Now we're going to stop here and have a pop quiz. I know everybody's on mute, so just holler it out to your dog or your husband. How many pages should a query letter be? Hope everybody said 1 page. That's right.
1 page. Yep.
There you go. We want to keep that in mind. Very good. I knew y'all were going to be sharp. All right. Now, after the homework, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. We're going to remember the basics of a query letter. Now, I know Melissa put online some sample query letters that I made up. One of them is for a nonfiction article. It was a real query letter that I submitted to Focus on the Family, and it was successful. I did end up publishing that article with them. The other one is for a fiction book, and it is entirely fiction because Angelina Jolie is not going to endorse anything I write. But I just wanted to include some things that you could put in a query letter for a fiction book. So I hope if you get a chance later, if you haven't already, to print those out and take a look at them. So as far as the basics in writing a query letter, we're going to write a formal business letter. So this is not the pretty one sheet that we take to conferences with us. Unless they specify, particularly, you're not going to put your picture on there. You're not going to put any pretty stuff and make it all prettied up. The editor just wants to see at a glance, as quickly as he can, what you're proposing. So the best tactic is to use a formal business letter. That is pretty much industry standard. It's what they're used to seeing, and it's what they can go by to judge very quickly whether they want this piece or not. So I'm going to show you some sample business letters, but first let me tell you the formatting that you're going to use is a 12-point Times New Roman with 1-inch margins. That's what you're going to, like you would any formal business letter. Don't be too personal in this business letter. Even if you know the editor, if you've met him or her, you want to keep it formal. Just remember, it's a job interview. So just like a job interview, you would dress up and you would be very formal. Then you want to do the same thing with this. Always err on the side of professionalism. So we're going to look at a sample here. So this would be what you would write up as a formal business letter. You're going to single space it, even though when you write your manuscript and submit a manuscript, you want to double space because you want to make it easy for the editor to read. In this, you're going to single space because you want to get as much information into how many pages? 1 page as you possibly can. So this is what the editors are used to seeing, so it's fine. You're going to start with the date. You're going to put your name and address, your contact information. If you have enough room, and we'll talk in a minute about why you might not have enough room. If you have enough room, put your phone number on there and definitely put your email address on there. So much is done by email now. You want to make sure they have your email address. Then you're going to skip a line and you're going to put their name, their company, their address, which I've always thought this was a waste of time, waste of space, because they know where they live. But anyway, that's part of a formal business letter. Then you're going to skip and you're going to use your formal address. And this is where you've done your research. You know who the editor is that you're addressing. So you're going to say, Dear Miss Doe, Dear Mr. Doe. If you don't know if they're a Mr. or Mrs. or a Miss, you can use just their first and last name. You could say, Dear Jane Doe, Dear Joe Doe, whatever. That way you're safe if you don't know for sure. But I think it's better to use a formal address if you can. Then you're going to follow that with a colon. Now, if you remember this way back from the typing days, those of us who took typing, we learned that this was a business letter. You used a colon afterwards. A comma is for a friendly letter. So this is our business letter. We'll use that colon. Oops, excuse me. Then we're going to space down and we're going to single space our paragraphs and just add another space in between them. Get as much in as we possibly can. And then in the closing, we're going to say, something like sincerely or thank you. We're going to, if this is email, we're just going to skip 1 space and put our name. If by chance you have happened upon one of those editors who wants a snail mail letter, wants it mailed to them, you're going to skip down 4 spaces and leave yourself room to actually sign the letter. That is part of a formal business letter, is the signature. So if you're going to mail it in, then you want to sign it. Leave yourself space for that. All right. So finally, you're going to proofread that letter. Keep in mind that spelling errors, typos, grammar mistakes, they're all your worst enemy. If you have those, the editor is going to figure, well, if you're not any more careful with this, and I hate to keep being negative, I feel like I'm being so negative, but if you're not any more careful with this 1-page letter, then what's your 90,000 word book going to be like? So be sure, do whatever you can that you do not have any errors. Read it out loud to yourself. You probably all know that the ear is more discerning than the eye, and you'll catch a lot of mistakes that way. Have somebody else read it. See if they see anything that you've made a mistake on. Make it as perfect as you can before you send it in. And again, how many pages should it be? 1 page. Very good. That's right. All right. I'm going to skip down here to the next slide. And I want to tell you that if you happen to have a letterhead that you normally use, make sure that it's very small, that it takes up very little room at the top. And it's fine to use one, but you wouldn't want to use one like this. This is one I use with my editing clients, and it's usually just an invoice or a receipt. And so I have very little typing on there. You wouldn't want to use something like this because it takes up way too much room. At the top has a cute little picture and all that. That's not something you want to use on a query letter. So I just wanted to point that out, but you can use a letterhead if you have one. So what do you include in the body of your query letter? We talked about format. We talked about doing our homework ahead of time. What do we actually include? Query letter consists of 3 fundamental elements: the article idea, your qualifications, and what I call pertinent data. Now, these may vary slightly from publisher to publisher. Again, in your homework, that's what you'll find out. I know one time a friend of mine had written a query letter. She was going to a conference, and she had researched a certain publisher she wanted to submit to. And so she asked me if I would look over her query letter. And when I did, I noticed that she had something about competitive markets in there. And I told her, that's something we usually just put in a book proposal. I would take this out and leave yourself more room to make more points about your actual book idea. But she came back and told me that she had researched this publisher, this editor, and he wanted that in there. So she had done her homework and she knew what that editor wanted. And I said, good for you. So again, that's how important it is to do our homework ahead of time and research and see what it is that they want. Always check their guidelines. They may want something a little different from what I'm telling you here. This is kind of the basics. And so if you include this, then you've got pretty much at least 80-90% of what an editor is going to want. But make sure that they don't want something a little bit more or a little bit different. Regardless, make sure you write your query in a lucid, sharply focused style. As one editor said, it needs to be this was an agent that said this. It needs to be a 3C query: clear, concise, and compelling. I'll say that again: clear, concise, and compelling. You want your query letter to be sharp and sharply focused to hit that editor right between the eyes. So we talked about the 3 main components of a query letter. So let's talk about the first one, the article or the book idea. You're going to want to open with a hook, just like you would in an article or your book. You want to hook your reader. And think about it, the editor is your first reader. So you want to hook him right away with your idea. Can't stress enough that editors are busy people. And so you've got to get his attention right away. You might use a startling statistic or an interesting quote or an anecdote, a personal experience. These are all, more for nonfiction, or you may want to use a little excerpt from your fiction book to catch his attention. And usually if I'm querying about an article, I'll start with actual article opening, because hopefully I've started my article with a hook. And that accomplishes two purposes. It hopefully hooks the editor's attention, and it also provides a sample of my writing. The editor wants to know, how do you write? What's your style? What's your slant? So that will accomplish 2 purposes at one time. So in any query letter, for nonfiction particularly, you want to give a clear idea of your subject and your slant and the direction you're going. You never want to leave an editor hanging. This is not where you use your cliffhangers and say, you'll just have to read the book to find out. You want to give the editor the idea of what is going to happen, how this book or this article is going to come to a conclusion. Now, you can use bullet points if those are appropriate. I would say they would probably be more appropriate for a how-to article or something where you're going to have multiple points. I believe the sample I gave you did have some bullet points. One reason I don't use those a lot, I just use them probably a couple of times in query letters, is they kind of take up a lot of space, but they're good in the fact that editors can just scan through those and see what you're going to cover. in your article or possibly your nonfiction book. So they can be very helpful. It just depends on what else you're going to include and whether you have enough space to use those. The editor may also want to know about your takeaway. How will the reader benefit from your article or from, say, your nonfiction book? This wouldn't be appropriate for fiction, but you want to kind of let them know, their focus is on their readers and how what their readers want. And so you want to let them know how the readers will benefit. Now, if you are writing fiction, you are going to have to include a short plot synopsis with, if at all possible, an overview of your main characters and the theme of the book. And that's a lot to do in a one-page letter. You're going to have to really, really tighten. And you know how they'll say, have that elevator pitch, have a one-sentence pitch that you can tell an editor if you're stuck with him in an elevator writing down. You want to do that for the query letter too. If you can do it for an editor, if you're in an elevator pitch, then you can do it for your query letter too. So you're going to have to really shorten and tighten and get as much in as you possibly can in a one-page letter. So those are all the article book idea components that you'll want to use. Then we're going to go into author qualifications. You want to tell them why you are the person to write this article or book, particularly for nonfiction. So this is not the time to be humble. You want to list any background that you have, any expertise or education that are pertinent to the query. So say you're writing an article on mental health and you have mental illness in your family. It doesn't mean you have to have a psychology degree to write about this. Your experience is going to be your expertise and basically your education. So you don't have to have, anything really high degrees or anything, but you need to let them know why you know about this topic and why you can write about it effectively. So say if you were writing an article about homeschooling and you homeschooled for 11 years, well, that's your expertise. That's why you are a good person to write this article. If you're writing a parenting article and you raised 12 kids and you're still walking and talking, then that's pertinent. Normally, though, if you're writing an article on some other topic, you're not going to tell them that you homeschooled or that how many kids you have. It's whatever is pertinent to the topic that you're writing about. I had a friend one time, she wrote an article about diseases that kids pick up from swimming pools. And when she queried the magazine, she probably didn't mention that she had a seminary degree, which she did, but it wasn't pertinent to the topic she was writing about. However, if she were going to, say, write a Bible study, then that would be pertinent. She would mention it in that case. So I'm just trying to make the point that it's whatever is pertinent to what you're writing about. You're also going to list any other articles or books that you've published, especially if they're on the same topic or the same genre as you're querying about. You're not going to, if you're highly published, you're not going to list everything, just list the most outstanding ones. And if you're not published, don't say you're not published. Just don't say anything. Just leave that out. You don't have to tell anybody that you're not published and, hey, I want you to be the first to publish this article. That's probably not going to make the impression you want to make. So those are some things that you will include in your author qualifications. And then the next thing you'll want to address, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in this order. I want to make that point. It's not, we got to do this, then this, then this. You can kind of weave this stuff in. And you may even include this at the beginning is the pertinent data, what I call the pertinent data. And that would be things like title, word length, date of availability. It's whatever the editor needs to know to make a decision on whether he wants to publish what you are proposing. So once again, as far as the word length, you're going to stick to whatever their guidelines say they accept, whether it's for a book or for an article. If the article or book is complete, then say so. If not, you can just estimate when it would be completed, say, within 2 weeks, 6 weeks after notification that you want to see this. So just let them know. They just want an idea. They're trying to plan magazines well ahead of time. Just let them know when it would be available. Now, let me just say this: if you're writing books, for nonfiction, usually the publishers don't mind if the book is not complete. Excuse me. You'll have to have probably at least 3 chapters complete, because that's what you're going to send with the book proposal. But unless their guidelines state otherwise, they usually don't require that you have the book complete. However, for fiction, you do need to have it complete, unless you have published with this particular publisher and they are familiar with your work and know that they can count on you. They want to see that the book is complete. And I hate to say, but this is because in the past, a lot of times authors come up with a great idea, but they just can't wrap it up. They can't bring it to a conclusion. So editors have been burned before. And so now they want to make sure that you have completed the whole book. So that's for fiction. Just know that that's what they're going to look for. Now, if you have any pictures or illustrations, any sidebars, anything that will enhance the article, you can let them know, or a nonfiction book even. Let them know in the query letter, anything that will appeal to the editor. Once again, though, check the guidelines and see if they accept these things. If they don't normally use illustrations or sidebars, then you don't want to mention that. You don't want to try to include that. I did write for a publication, 2 or 3 articles for them, and I knew that they wanted 2 sidebars with any article. They wanted one on resources and one with just like more information on that topic. So I had those ready and mentioned that in the query letter because I had done my homework and knew what they wanted. So also, if you are going to make a simultaneous submission, you want to mention that in the query letter. First, you're going to make sure that they'll take that, accept simultaneous submission. And you will mention that in a query letter. Also, if you perhaps need to use a pseudonym, then you want to mention that in the query letter too. Just anything that the editor needs to know to make a decision. For fiction, be sure to let them know that if this is the first of a series, let them know that. They love series. They love to know that you have future books planned. They like to know that you're not a one book wonder. So make sure to let them know that in the query letter too. Finally, you're going to want to end with a thank you. You could say something like, thank you for your consideration of this query. Just keep in mind that editors are very busy people, and this lets them know that you appreciate their time, that you realize that if they took the time and they've gotten all the way to the end of your query letter, that you are very grateful for that. So that's something that you can include at the end of your query letter. Now, we've talked about query letters, and I'll take questions later, but I also understand that there have been some questions about the difference between query letters and cover letters. And so let's just talk about a cover letter for a second. Cover letter is not going to be your first contact. You would use a cover letter if you've already either queried the editor or met the editor at a conference and made contact with them, and they have asked you to submit your proposal or your manuscript. So this a cover letter has nothing to do with a query letter. Query letter is where you're making your first contact and asking them, are they interested in this? Cover letter is where they've already expressed interest and you are submitting what they ask for. So you're either submitting a book proposal or an article or your entire book manuscript, if that's what they ask for. Yes.
The one exception to that would be if you're like writing short fiction, flash fiction, or short stories. Very often you haven't contacted the editor beforehand and you are submitting the full story and usually use a cover letter with that. That's the one exception.
All right. Thank you for telling me that. That's
You're welcome.
So they don't, in other words, they would say in their guidelines, they don't take query letters, I guess.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And some publications don't even want a cover letter. So again, reading those guidelines is essential.
Right, because you're not going to submit a cover letter with everything. However, if you've made contact and maybe it's been a while, say you met them at a conference 6 weeks ago, 3 months ago, or you submitted that query letter and it took you 6 weeks to write the article or whatever, you do want to be sure that you remind them in some form or fashion how you met them and that they did request your information, your proposal or your manuscript. Because once again, these editors are so busy and they've seen maybe 1,000 other query letters, 1,000 other manuscripts since they talked to you. And so you want to remind them and let them know, yes, you are interested in this. And so that would be the purpose of a cover letter. You're going to remind them who you are and how you met. You know, I met you at the Mid-South Christian Writers Conference and you requested my proposal. So that's what you're going to use the cover letter for. You want to be sure you give your complete contact information in that. Of course, if you're submitting the whole manuscript and a proposal too, you'll have your contact information in there, but it's still good to have it in the query letter or the cover letter. And just enough information that they'll remember your work. So you're not going to be as detailed as you would in a query letter, but still you may want to include, you'll want to include the title, the genre, the word count, and anything that's going to pique their interest. Again, in your work. Apparently it was piqued before. They wouldn't have asked to see your proposal or your manuscript, but you want to keep it shorter and to the point. Again, this, like the query letter, will be a one-page letter, but you don't want to go into as much detail because they hopefully will remember. Once you just give them a little information, they'll remember who you are and what it was that you were writing about. Now, I did want to mention this. I just recently edited a book proposal for someone, and she was submitting to a particular editor. So we were kind of going by their guidelines. I thought it was interesting that they asked not for a cover letter, but for a cover email. So once again, we need to know what they want. And in that, she said she wanted the title, the genre, the word count, just like we talked about, and your complete contact information. She also asked if you had an agent to list the agent's name. And then she went on to say, this email should interest me in reading your proposal. So she wanted a little bit of just something, once again, to pique her interest, to make her think, yeah, I want to take my time to read this proposal. Now, this particular author had met this editor at a conference. And it had not been a long amount of time. So I recommended to her, and I actually kind of double checked. I cheated a little bit. I double checked with the editor herself, but I said, just include the concept for your book. Don't try to, go into a whole lot of detail, but just include the concept behind your book in the cover email. And that way she'll remember and get the idea of what you're writing about. So those are the things that you will include in a cover letter. And I thank you, Melissa, for or who was that? No, that was Brandy that was telling me about the ones that do not want a cover letter, or that you would include a cover letter, even if you've not made previous contact with. Okay, so how is our time going? I have a couple of slides that we can look at.
It's about 20 minutes until 12.
Okay, so if we have a couple more minutes, we're just going to show you kind of a sample query letter that somebody had asked me to look over one time. And I want, according to what we've talked about so far, can we either do this? We can do this either in chat, or I didn't know if we could unmute or not. But if you want them to do it in chat, that's fine. But just what do you see? Do you see anything here that could be improved according to what we've talked about query letters, about how to write a query letter? I can't see chat, so somebody's gonna have to tell me.
Well, she's got her name up at the top when you kind of wanted that more to the left, didn't you? And
yeah, she was actually using a letterhead, and it doesn't show as well on this, but her letterhead was huge.
It looks huge.
Huge.
Takes up a lot of real estate.
It does. Exactly. Yeah, she didn't need to do that. All
She's
right.
using first name to addressing too. That's pretty
Mm.
personal.
It is. It is. And then she used a comma after it. What should we use?
A colon.
A colon.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
good
That's right.
point.
Yeah. All right. And then this was her closing. Once again, she had
First, she duplicated her material on the bottom.
exactly. She already had her contact information at the top. And then what was the point of putting? And let me tell you, I know you can't see the whole thing, but it was 2 pages. And so I told her, no, we've got to cut this down. And she did. She did a great job. I'd love to go through and read you the whole letter and then read you what she came up with, because she did a great job of condensing everything into something that, and she didn't even, in the first example, she didn't, or first letter she wrote, she didn't even mention some things that were pertinent to her book that would make an editor want to take a look at. So it's so important that we work hard on these query letters and make sure that we have them, that we give the editor all the information he needs without going into too much detail. This is what she came back with. She still had a little bit of a letterhead, but it was much, much smaller. And then she changed her greeting and did it properly. So she did a much, much better job on a query letter. So
Melissa commented in the chat that a lot of times these days she's noticing that signatures are taking up a lot of the material that are typically found in headers. And she's absolutely right, because on email, you put your primary header data that you would have used on paper in your signature line in an email.
yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah. But think about it though, if you are doing this as an attachment, sometimes they will print these out. So you do want to make sure that you've got your contact information on there, that they know, that they can connect with you again, because sometimes emails get lost and, things like that. So even though it does seem repetitive to have it in your email and in your query letter, still, if it's an attached query letter and they print it out, you want to have that there too.
Now, what is your difference in formatting between a printed query letter you send in the mail and a query letter that you send in email? What changes do you make from, say, the letterhead at the top to maybe something in a signature?
I would do, if it's an attached query letter, I would do attached to an email, I would do them pretty much the same.
Yeah, but if the email itself is the actual query letter, which oftentimes it is these days, how do you format that?
Yeah, if it's copy and pasted. In that case, I don't think I would do the headers like you do in a formal business letter. I just don't think that would be appropriate. So I think I would do it, use the body, and then at the bottom, like you say, either in your signature line or whatever, be sure you've got your contact information down there. And again, you would have to read their guidelines and see if they specify what they want. But you're right, the body of the email, you're not going to be putting all that, because for one thing, the formatting is not going to come out right. When you copy and paste into an email, it usually messes up your formatting if you're copying from a Word document. So I would just probably use what you would normally use in the body of your email. Just write it as a Word document, as a one-page document, so that you make sure you're not going over one page, that you're not going, it's easy for us to keep going on when we want to get all that information in there. So I would go ahead and write it up as a Word doc and make sure we're sticking to a one-page format, that we don't have more wording than we need.
That's a very good point on emails.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. So anyway, there's really no single way to write a good query letter. Editors are, individuals just like we are. So they want to sometimes see different things, but this is kind of the basic standard that you can use. And if you use these rules, then you're going to hit more than you miss with your query letter. So anyway, I can't see my mouse. Okay, there we go. So polish that query letter until it shines. That's my final point. And I know you can do it. It's not easy, especially when you're trying to get all that stuff about your fiction book in there, but you can do it. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And do we want to open for more questions?
Yeah, I have a question on doing your homework.
Mhm.
And I haven't written an article for a while specifically like this, so it maybe they're better. But it seems like when I go to some of the publishers' website to find the guidelines, find out how they want,
Mhm.
they're hard to find sometimes. Sometimes you see writers' guidelines are right for us up at the top. That's always easy. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll go to the about page and I could find something. Sometimes I've scrolled down to the bottom, but sometimes it's hard to find what they're looking for. I know some things they've got themes already for the year already figured out. Do you have some tips on finding that info on some of the websites?
Well, I've looked at those places you mentioned. Also, I found it sometimes under contact, which is
Ah,
kind of an odd place to look.
yeah.
And there are some that simply do not list their guidelines on there.
Okay.
I don't know what the deal is. But if not, I mean, if you cannot find guidelines, then, this standard query letter, that's what you'll have to go with.
Okay.
But yeah, I've done the same thing, Jean.
Yeah. Sometimes you just really have to hunt for them.
Yeah, it can be frustrating.
Yeah. On that, you've presented lots of wisdom, and I love the depth of experience that you had to give us such good examples. And it's been a long time since I've thought about business letter writing, so that was good reminders, good points to remind stuff. And several of us were reflecting on high school typing class days, on that, which
Keyboarding now, they don't even call it typing class.
I know, and no longer those 2 spaces between sentences. Boy, if that's not a hard habit to get out of, when
Absolutely.
you've done that and stuff. And the correct spelling, I've heard that often at conferences where they say that's one of the key. If you don't have your grammar and your spelling right, boy, you're in the rejection pile very quickly.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, on that. Questions, Melissa, Brandy, you got some questions to add?
I had a comment just that I really appreciate it because, like you say, having that foundation to build on, even when you're not quite sure, like when you're hunting for the requirements on their website, to have that foundation to go off is so helpful. So I really appreciated all of this. Thank you for
Right.
that.
Right. You said, I noticed the handout that you gave us for conquering query letters. You under the pertinent data, and I love the word pertinent. That's really a good anchor, I think, to keep to this. But you had proposed a series for fiction. You want to talk a little bit about that? It's probably in a book query.
Well, I think that was just, if you're going to do a series, let them know that. And
Okay.
if you've got room, you could even mention, if you have the idea, if you've already got it kind of laid out what you want to do, you could mention that, where you're headed next. But I just think the main thing is they want to know that they're going to have some more books, especially like if you're querying an agent, they want to know that it's not just going to be one book and done.
Yeah.
And a publisher would be the same way.
Right. I think that then they're laughing in the chat, just to let you know, the idea of editing before sending, we need to adopt, and when we text message people too.
Oh yeah.
Or that autocorrect on it as you text message stuff is bizarre, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, on that way. Yeah, I agree with that on that. I was trying to think. I love the 3 C's too: clear, concise, and compelling. That's something we just keep in mind on our one sheets or any of them, or when we present to editors or publishers.
Mhm.
And the 3 C's on that.
The sharper it is, the more it's going to catch their attention.
That was a very good thing. So I highlighted some things on my notes that I took on that. But again, I'll go back to, I had, just as a reflection on author qualifications. I did this a long time ago at a conference. I presented to a editor a book idea I had on mother-in-law manuals. And she said, well, what qualifies you to write this? And I really stammered. I failed miserably in selling myself on that. I was selling myself as a daughter-in-law, what I wished I had known, but I didn't sell myself that way. So I think sometimes maybe to ask yourself that question, why are you the right person to write that article or write that book? Why you? And
That's
that
a
might
great
make
idea.
you really think through your qualifications, because like you said, you've been a mom for 18 years, 20 years, you're a mom of somebody with a chronic disease, Brandy, that qualifies you for that. I don't know, Brandy, if you want to reflect on that a little bit.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, sometimes when you're used to just living your life, you don't think you have qualifications
Mhm.
when you do. And yet at the same time, it's important not to oversell yourself. So I think it's really good to consider your qualifications with balance and prayerfully, so that when you do present yourself, you're doing it as accurately as possible. Now, a
Mhm.
lot of times we do have qualifications we don't think we have, and sometimes we might think we're better qualified than we are. So, if we just pray ahead of time and asking ourselves, why me?
Yeah.
And just use a little bit of humility, but
Mhm.
not put yourself down, then we might land in a good place for what our qualifications really are in selling ourselves and presenting.
Yeah, it's true.
Point. Mhm.
True. So I'm just curious, our two fiction writers, our flash writer down there and our is it Scottish or Irish? Melissa, I always forget that. What qualifies you guys?
Well, yeah, Irish is the one. I've actually studied my subject for over 20 years now, so I'd say
Yeah.
that's a pretty good qualification there.
Yes, 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 I would. Yeah, I'd say that. Flash fiction though, man, Brandy, I'm not sure. Well, how do you say, because you've written so many articles, is that kind of what you say that, or?
Um, well, I think when it comes to your qualifications on writing flash fiction, I think it's really just making sure that you have a good story.
Ah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. Good reminders. Well, Tracy, this has been delightful today. I don't know if we want to invite, we got some people in the chat if they want to come on back on, and if we'd ask any more questions. Melissa, while we're still doing a recording, do you want to tell us a little bit about next week's Writers Chat?
Sure. Patricia Tiffany Morris is going to come back with us and talk about poetry and submissions. So we're gonna approach poetry from the submissions angle, and also I think she's going to address a little bit about organizing your submissions and kind of streamlining that process a little bit. So lots of good things coming for there for and those who are interested in poetry but don't know much about the market.
I think that will be great, because I think a lot of people have, I think some of the best writers are poets too. Could
Well,
say
think about
something.
how many times have you written a poem, but you don't know what to do with it? That'd be me.
Well, when you think about it, some of our hooks are poetic, and then Tracy talked about hooks on that, and that is maybe we could use it more than once and stuff. Anybody got some questions while we have Tracy here? I'm going to ask a question then. I'm curious about your caregiver website. Talk to us about this. Is it a new passion of yours, or what are you doing with the caregiver stuff?
Well, it's a blog that I started, and I've cared for my parents for 6 years, and then my mother-in-law for 4 years. She passed away last summer. She was 100 years old. And so I'm putting up some blog posts. I'm also, this is kind of new, hoping to write a devotional book for caregivers.
Yep.
And I've got some exciting possibilities with that. So anyway, that's what we're doing.
Good. That is exciting. I've always had a special place. I worked public health for 20 plus years, and we really did a caregiver support program there, and the caregivers have been passion of my heart for a long time, so we have that in common. And probably my first traditionally published book was Caregivers Devotional for Barbers. I was one of the contributing authors for that. So there's huge need out there, huge need. And that's quite old. So to have a need for a new one, I think is very important. They're very important. It's short so they can read it. Well, but feeding their spirit, while they're taking care of somebody, it's huge. Caregivers.
And there's a lot of different offshoots with that you can go. There's special needs caregiving, there's dementia caregiving, there's just elderly caregiving.
Yeah, and there are more and more men doing it too. So we're hoping have a man co-author with us. So
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And that Sally asked, would you mention that you met them at a conference, like in the pertinent data paragraph, or how would you incorporate that into a query letter?
yes, if they, especially if they requested more information from you, yes, definitely tell them you met them at a conference. Yes, that's very important. And that lets them know that they were interested in it. They may not remember it right now, and you're going to remind them, but that shows that they were interested in what you had.
She's wondering where in the query you put that. So like for me, I would say, I met you. I would open pretty much with that. What would you do?
Would too. Yeah. Usually you'll put that in your email. Actually, I would say, even if you're attaching the query letter, I would put that in your email and say, I met you at da, da, da. But yes, or I enjoyed meeting you at the, whatever conference. But yeah.
On email, do you have a suggestion of what's a good subject line?
Oh yeah, and so, actually some some publishers will specify what they want you to put in the subject line.
Oh,
But I'll put requested, if it's a proposal, requested manuscript. That lets them know that they wanted it. So that usually bumps it up to the top of their
Right.
email.
that's what I had done on a follow-up with some conferences to ask Sally's question, requested material from Florida Christian Writers Conference or something
Yeah.
like that, Yeah, but that's a good point. They might have that in the guidelines, wouldn't they?
Mhm. Hopefully,
Mhm.
not all of them do though.
All right, now you've got me thinking a little bit here, because you've mentioned a couple times attaching your query letter as, an attachment that would be printed out, which tells me that you're writing a cover letter for your query letter. And in the past, I've always been said, oh, you don't ever write a cover letter for your query letter. So you have me a little curious about this phenomenon now with attaching a query letter, but you're writing
Okay.
the cover letter
Well,
as
really,
an email.
No, not really. No. Mm-mm. No, I'm sorry, I gave you that impression. No, I was really talking about if you're sending a proposal or a manuscript that you're going to, yeah, they were asking in the query letter. Okay, I understand what you're saying now. No, usually in the email, I'm just going to say, and if it's just a query letter out of the blue, which normally is what it is, then I'm just going to say, I'm querying, I would just briefly say, I'm querying about an article about homeschooling. Thank you for your consideration of this query letter. And that's all I would really put in the email.
Which is essentially a cover letter.
Well, I guess you could consider it that way, but you're going to put
Well,
something.
it is in the fiction world, in the flash fiction world. That's pretty much their amount of a cover letter.
All right. Well, I mean, you're going to put something in the email. So
Right. Yeah. So I've just never thought about attaching a query letter if you have like the rest of your stuff. I guess it really goes to read the guidelines and see what they want. Do they want their query letter separately attached, or do they want it right in the email?
Yeah, which most of them are going to want it attached. So yeah, so it's a good skill to have, to write a whole query letter.
Well, I think your point then, there's a lot of times they print that out. I
Yeah.
could see how you'd want to print that query letter out, stick that in the pile of possibilities, or whatever the process is, and it sure makes it easier when it's an attachment, not
Mhm.
necessarily in the email, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Agree.
Wow. Well, Tracy, thank you. This has been a great overview, reminder, formal business letter. I needed to hear that. So I think it was great and motivating, inspirational. You are a great presenter, and we just appreciate your wisdom. Brandy, Melissa, anything to say on closing?
No, just a great session. Thank you.
Great session. Thank you. If you're watching this on the replay, if you've been with us today, for those of you that are here live, we invite you to stay for the after party, and we'll see everybody next week on Writers Chat. We're going to be poets. We're going to put our poet hats on next week. So thank you again, Tracy. We'll see you next week, everybody. Bye now.
Having me.